How did your brother passing away, how did that affect you?
I used to have like little panic attacks about my own mortality, and that affected me for quite a few years, but I think it also kind of made you a little bit more ambitious to make the most of your time here.
Jeremy Harbour, entrepreneur and self-confessed deal junkie. He has been thinking differently about business since a family trauma occurred before he had even hit his teenage years. With hundreds of millions worth of value created, this is the guy you go to if you haven't thought about buying and selling businesses as part of your growth strategy.
Bent this guy's ear for 2 hours about all my business plans and the things I was going to do and how I was going to take over the world.
What can you do to make your business worth more as part of a sale?
The other things that you can do to massively drive value are joint ventures, mergers, acquisitions, exits, because all of those will have that order of magnitude impact on the size. And as you move up the size pyramid, the opportunity, the audience for potential buyers grows with you. The only thing worse than having one business is having 12 businesses. My mind just went, what the is this? You need to fail fast.
I've got a quick favour to ask you. Nearly 90% of people listening to this podcast right now don't follow or subscribe to us. And my goal is to get that down to 80%. So if you've ever liked an episode or a clip that we've put out, please could you click that follow or subscribe button. It helps us more than you know to bring more guests onto the podcast and put out better and better content for you. Thank you. Before we dive into this episode, I want to take a second to speak about our sponsor, Pith Stem, who we are thrilled to have on this journey with us. As someone who is always looking for ways to improve my healthy hustle, Pith Stem's DropTop desk stood out to me as the best full work-from-home solution on the market. The world of work from home is changing, and a laptop or screen perched on your lap or dining room table isn't enough anymore. It's imperative that we have a solution at home that matches our productivity station that we can have in our office. But of course, homes weren't made to be worked in, and not all of us want a dedicated study. That's why I'm so happy that Pith Stem created this perfect solution. They designed this desk with both the needs of the professional and their home in mind. It's perfect because it allows me to have a full productivity station that suits my needs and helps me get the most out of every minute that I spend at it, not only so I work comfortably, but that I actually enjoy it. And the best thing about DropTop, I can close and lock it at the end of the day to keep work and home separate. And it looks awesome on the wall. You can get your DropTop desk anywhere in the world from pithandstem.com or just Google DropTop and you'll find it pretty quickly. Now, let's get on to today's guest. So you're a self-confessed deal junkie.
Yeah.
What I'm really, really interested in is where did that all start? And I'd love to talk about when you were sort of picking flowers from the garden and selling them on to the people that come into your mum's salon and where that sort of passion came from. Where did that spark come from?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's always this argument about nature or nurture, and I think there has to be a bit of nature because there has to be some drive or something that's underlying, and then there's a whole bunch of nurture that comes after that. I mean, I think post selling the flowers as a 7-year-old, I could work on my dad's farm or in my mum's business for £1 an hour. And so all that goes through your head is, how the fuck can I make more than £1 an hour? And so that invariably turned into selling stuff at school and using school as kind of a captive audience. And I think there's a nice little dopamine hit that you get when you execute a sale. When you talk to somebody, overcome some objections, they say yes, there's a kind of a win, and you get this little buzz from it. And every business, the value of a sale grew and grew and grew. And now I buy and sell companies. It's the same hit I was getting as an 8-year-old. And that's why I use the junkie term, because I think, when people ask me what's your favorite deal, I always say the next one. And that's a proper addict answer.
Yeah, but it's interesting because you touched on dopamine there, and a lot of people now, dopamine comes from scrolling or their phones.
Yeah.
And do you think that's affecting people's ability or want or will to make sales because they're not looking for the right dopamine if you're looking at business?
Possibly, yeah, 100%. I mean, although a lot of businesses are online, so you can get the dopamine hit from your Shopify account going ping, but yeah, certainly, I mean, over addiction to devices and stuff, I think is really, really toxic. And I've got young children. I've got a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old, and it is just a perpetual battle. And the emotional turmoil that's created when they don't have access to devices is astonishing. When I think, when I was a kid, I was running around setting fire to shit, and mainly myself actually, and yeah, doing that kind of outdoorsy sort of stuff. So yeah.
Why do you think you wanted to make sales? Obviously, you mentioned your mum's got a business, your dad had a farm. Why at 7 did you want to make money?
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, and the answer is I don't know. That's the nature bit. Later on, I think there was definitely that kind of influence. I think, when I spoke to my friends at school, I think they had this idea that you either go and work for the government in some capacity, whether that's like military service or civil service or something like that, because there was a lot of kids that were, sons of diplomats or, soldiers or whatever that I went to school with. Or that you went into corporate, you went and worked for a big oil company or something like that. And that was the kind of two choices that they had. And then I looked at my parents, and they'd followed a path that didn't fit either of those. And I describe it as the do whatever the fuck you want path. And so, and whenever I used to ask my grandfather about these business ideas, I would say to him, I think I can sell this, or I think I can do that, or I think. His way of saying shut up and leave me alone was to say, oh well, they won't let you starve. Which was kind of like, there's no downside to this, you might as well try. They're not going to let you starve. And in fact, his wife, my grandmother, the last thing she ever said to me she had cancer, she was in a hospice, and it was the last time I saw her. She said, I didn't make much money in this life, but I had great fun trying. And it's that journey aspect of it. We were touching on this before we started recording. That journey aspect is so invaluable. It's the most fun you have in entrepreneurship is the time leading up to getting everything you think you want.
Yeah, so. Exactly. Because like we were saying, problems sort of grow with you, right? So whether you've got a £10 a day business or a £1 million a day business, you've still got problems and they all grow.
Yeah, the problems have a few extra zeros, but also you extinguish the survival problems. And so, when I started out, I was rummaging down the back of the sofa to get change to put petrol in the car. It wasn't my car. It was a car I was borrowing. It was, living on packet noodles for days on end. All that stupid shit at the time felt hard, but you were so excited and so imbued with energy and so passionate about what you were doing that nothing was going to stop you. And actually in my first book, Go Do, I talk about this idea where people often say entrepreneurs are greedy and they're all about the money, whereas actually I think that demonstrates that entrepreneurs are all about the outcome, not the money. They're all about solving a problem, creating something. Whereas the people who do a job they hate just so they can pay a mortgage, they're all about the money. They're willing to sacrifice their life. They're willing to give up their time in exchange for money to pay a mortgage, to live a particular lifestyle, to go on 2 weeks of holiday a year, to have that mediocrity. They're willing to sacrifice everything for that mediocrity, whereas the entrepreneur is willing to sacrifice everything to escape mediocrity, basically.
But I guess also within entrepreneurship, there's different variants, because you see entrepreneurs who are entrepreneurs, sure, but they treat it as a job. So they don't care about the quality of their product or service. They just get someone to come onto their service for 3 months. If they can get 3 months money out of them, they're happy. They let them leave because it's not good enough. Whereas the way that we see it, if I'm looking into the entrepreneurial world at people that are doing far better than we are, is that the ones who are doing really well or have unlocked that level of success, if you will, are the people that have been able to keep someone longer. They understand that the product and the big vision is more powerful than just today's money or today's service.
Yeah. I think, look, everyone wants to get rich quick and everybody jumps on the next new thing. And I mean, the next new thing was e-commerce when, like 20 years ago, and there's only one Jeff Bezos. There's one person that smashed that particular avenue. There's lots of people that have done incredibly well at it as well. And then there's millions of people that have failed or have done badly or have stagnated. So yeah, of course there is getting away from that kind of get rich quick and creating real value. The whole premise of capitalism is an exchange of value, and it works perfectly when you have competition and low regulation, small government. Everything then can, we end up with more perfect products, we end up with more perfect services, we end up with a proper free market. As soon as the government gets involved, it all goes horribly wrong. So. It's
very true. So when you're looking back and you're thinking about when you were running the car boot sales, right? So very early on in your journey, Were you thinking differently then, do you think? Were you looking at how you could make slightly more profit margin out of your car boot sale, or how you get customers to come to you? Was it an early stage?
Yeah. So I was always trying to, figure out the kind of hacks and things. I mean, one of the ones that I figured out quite early on was that if I could buy these digital watches that were imported from China, and this is like very early days of importing shit from China as well. It was before the big kind of transition to Chinese manufacturing. But I think I would pay like 40 or 50p for watches if I bought like 10 of them, and I could get them down to 27p if I bought 1,000. Now I wouldn't sell 1,000 watches in 6 months, and so what I used to do is go around to other market traders to see if they would buy watches from me at a lower price to enable me to get a lower entry point. And there was an old market trading expression, which is bought right is half sold, which is you kind of make your money on the way in of a transaction, not necessarily on the way out. And there's a lot of wisdom in that also works in my kind of current world of M&A, which is that you make all your money on the way into a deal, although the exit is where the capital comes from. If your entry point is correct, you can't lose money. Basically, you create an asymmetric bet, which is a bet you can't lose.
It's interesting because actually, when you're talking about the buying it right to sell it at a better price, it's similar. It goes back to your father's farming days, I'm sure, because if you sow it right, you're already halfway to market.
Yeah.
You're already halfway to the profit.
Exactly.
Which is really cool. Did you fit in at school? If you're thinking like this at an early stage?
No, not at all. And I was a bit of a loner. Also, it was a predominantly boarding school, and I was a day pupil, so I was the one that went home, and then they all had their little gangs and clubs that hung out afterwards. So, but like I say, I because I went home, I was the perfect person to then bring stuff in the next day and sell to them. And anything that was against the school rules, like at the time there was this big thing about Gothic jewellery, which no one was allowed to wear, but I found a supplier for it in Bristol and was selling that at school. And so everybody had their kind of CND sign and skull rings and all these kind of things that were completely against the school rules, but they loved them.
So you kept up to date with the trends, and you were trying to almost like exploit the trends into the school.
and bring people what they wanted. Yeah.
Okay, so literally give them what they wanted. Okay, cool.
Illegal jewelry, chocolate, that kind of stuff.
There you go. Yeah. Okay, so and how did your brother passing away at a young age, did that affect that? If you're already a loner, you're already working on the business quite a lot. It's quite a different path, and then obviously that tragic event happened. How did that affect you?
Well, I think it gave me an immense sense of my own mortality, because obviously I think most kids, and it's amazing. I went to about 30 funerals by the time I was 14. I had somebody at school, one of my close friends, my brother, my grandmother was one of 14 kids, and she was the youngest, so all my uncles that I used to hang out with kept popping their clogs while I was growing up. And then I met people who were 30 and no one close to them had died yet. And it was just such an astonishing kind of that even existed, because I just assumed, it became such a, I went to more funerals than weddings. It was kind of a kind of fact of life. And I used to have like little panic attacks about my own mortality. Like I would go to sleep and then wake myself up panicking that I'd died, or panicking that I was going to not wake up or whatever. And that affected me for quite a few years. But I think it also kind of made you a little bit more ambitious to make the most of your time here, because it makes you realize how finite things are. So and also makes you a little bit hedonistic. You try and find as much pleasure in life as you can. I think that got me out of the UK, made me travel a lot, made me experience a lot around the world, because you feel like you're on this kind of borrowed time.
Yeah, and it goes back to what you said about the early stages of business, right? It was almost like because of that was happening, and you realised that maybe you're on borrowed time, or you felt like that certainly, that you wanted to find enjoyment in other ways, and you're looking at the options, which is like the government jobs, the oil jobs, whatever it might be, and they're almost too structured. I'm speaking for you now, but that's almost my opinion of how I would feel.
Would suck all the joy out of life. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So then, how did your parents react then? At 15, you've had all this experience, a lot of life experience, but as well as business experience. And you tell them at 15, I'm going to leave school and I'm going to do something different. And they're both the first in their families to go to university, if I'm right.
Correct.
So how do they respond to that?
Actually, really well. I think one, they'd had a son that had died, and there was a little bit of let him do what the fuck he wants. And two, I had this careers guidance person. And I think careers guidance people have at school have a real challenge because kids don't know what the fuck they want, so they just kind of go meh 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 to everything, and they're trying to walk them through stuff. And so I think the default setting is, I'll go do A levels, go to university, like, you know, get that behind you, and then you can figure out what you want to do. And that's their kind of default setting. Whereas I just bent this guy's fucking ear for 2 hours about all my business plans and the things I was going to do and how I was going to take over the fucking world, and he just turned around to my parents and said, look, I've never met a kid that actually knows what they want to do. I think maybe you should just let him get on and do it.
And then, so how did that manifest? What was the next step? What did you do from, I'm going to leave school?
Yeah, my mum said you have to finish your GCSEs.
Okay.
You have to do, you know, your last exam, and then you can leave. So I basically just didn't go to school, and I just went back and did the exams. And so I think I had about 160 detentions by the time I left school. And I was like, this is hilarious. When am I going to serve these detentions?
Yeah, exactly. What are you going to do?
Yeah. I actually went back there recently, and they didn't keep me. It was amazing.
Imagine if they did. What a story.
Yeah.
Okay, so you get to that point. So then what does the first step look like outside of the sort of institutionalized world? Did you go for a job? Did you get a business straight away?
No, so I was already running a business, which was the market trading business. And that kind of evolved randomly into supplying amusement machines. So one of the suppliers I was going to in London had this amusement machine that I bought. That randomly turned into me supplying amusement machines to loads of pubs and clubs and stuff like this. That business went bust when I was 18. So there was a really good kick in the nuts and a lesson learned there. And I then got into telecoms initially as like a dealer for another telecoms company, and then eventually getting my own kind of licensing and setup to be able to supply customers myself.
And so what did you learn from the failure of that first business at 18?
So the biggest lesson, I guess, is that it doesn't kill you. So I think at the point immediately before it failed, I was stressed, a horrible mess. I'd lost loads of weight. I was pasty and white. I had a physiological reaction to the phone ringing, because when I answered it, people would say horrible things to me. So literally the ringtone would trigger like an anxiety attack when it rang. And then after it went bust, all of that kind of stops. You have a really good night's sleep. You wake up with all your arms and legs and you go, fuck, that wasn't so bad. And then it starts you thinking, well, hang on a second. I was walking a tightrope and it felt really dangerous. But actually the tightrope was only 6 inches off the ground. So if the tightrope's only 6 inches off the ground, why not fucking run? Why am I pissing about tiptoeing over this thing when I can have a good run at it? And it just makes you a bit more ambitious in your next venture.
I really like this, because I've heard you talk about this before, and I've read it in a couple of your books where you talk about humility and the importance of falling flat on your face. But I've never heard you say it like that, where you're only six inches off the ground. So why not run? Because a lot of people that we see in business, they are going so slowly, trying to make the absolute perfect decision every time. And then when it fails, they are gutted, and it takes them ages to get back on the bike.
Yeah, no, I think you need to fail, and you need to fail fast. Obviously, if you can fail small, that's better. But I mean, everything you should push until it breaks, and then figure out why it broke, and do it again without breaking. And that's the same. I mean, you learn everything like that. You learn language by making mistakes with words. You learn, walking by falling over. You learn, everything you'll ever learn, you learn through trial and error and making small mistakes. And so in business, you need to accelerate that process and make those mistakes faster to figure out the right way of doing stuff. I mean, particularly, around sales and marketing and things like that, you need to be incredibly dynamic, because, as fast as you can figure it out, it's going to change anyway. So if you fuck about too much, you're just never going to sell anything.
Because business is not logical, right?
No, it's not at all. Yeah.
So which elements of business would you say are more logical and you would put more attention into, if you're saying that sales and marketing clearly are important, but they change so quickly that it's almost like other people can look after that? And
I think, look, other people can look after everything ultimately. I mean, I think the first rung on the entrepreneurial ladder is startup. It's a rite of passage. Everyone should do it. If you haven't started a business, you should. You need to understand how to create a product, how to sell it to people, how to employ people, all of those things. However, the kind of the insanity that makes you do a startup isn't particularly applicable to any other stage in that business's development. And so what tends to happen is startup entrepreneurs then try and run businesses. And I think actually your skill set is quite narrow, and you're much better off employing people to do the jobs within the business as the business starts to scale. And the entrepreneur should move up the entrepreneurial ladder. And the next rung from startup is actually deal making. I think it's mergers, acquisitions, joint ventures, ventures, and exits. And so after you've got past startup, after you have a viable product and you have a route to market and you've got an addressable market that can be targeted, everything in that business is then a job. And the entrepreneur should not be involved in any of those jobs. The entrepreneur should then focus on shareholder value. So the initial startup is customer value, and the next rung is shareholder value. And shareholder value, like I say, mergers, acquisitions, joint ventures, exits, those are the things that have an order of magnitude impact on the shareholder value. Before we started, we talked about storytelling in marketing. And obviously, when you're in the customer value phase, the storytelling is all about the product and why people need it and the history of the company or the people involved or whatever it is that you're going to tell a story about. And when you move up, it's the equity story. It's the why people should invest in this company, why people should buy this company, why this is a great company. So you move into telling an equity story from a kind of product story.
And this is the part I think a lot of people won't have thought about or won't have heard of. And because I think people get so, in fact, it's your own book. I'm going to quote it, it's Go Do Deals, where you're talking about the entrepreneurial creativity is what completely holds most entrepreneurs back.
Yeah.
And that's the part I'm really interested in with you. Like how does that manifest? At what point do you see the entrepreneur and go, you need to stop, I need to start doing deals?
Again, it comes from mistakes and humility. So I always thought there were three levers that I could control to grow my business. I thought there was sales, marketing, and the team around me. And just by twiddling with those three levers, that's what would drive growth. And that is, in a startup, the three things that you've got to play with. But the telecoms company I had, I was just fortunate that in that industry, there were hundreds of thousands of small telecoms companies. And there were a number of telecoms companies who grew by acquisition. So they would just mop up these smaller companies. So, and that's not that typical. I mean, the marketing industry has it a little bit, but it was very prevalent in telecoms in the 1990s. And so I had lots of meetings with people that were trying to buy my business. Now, in my mind, buying a business was the last thing on my agenda. The banks wouldn't lend me any money. I didn't have any money. My choices at the end of the month were, do I pay my credit card or do I pay my staff? It wasn't, do I buy this company? That just wasn't on the agenda. And so for me, like, acquisition was off the table. And then I start having these meetings with all these people and realize they haven't got any fucking money either. So I might as well be on that side of the table doing what he's doing and pitching the business owner. And that's exactly what I did. And long story short, I bought a competitor down the road without any cash up front. I grew by a year's worth of sales in an afternoon. It was a complete epiphany that there's a fourth lever, which is growth by acquisition. Don't run the marathon, just run the last 10 yards, still get a medal. It was a game changer in terms of what I did. And I went on a rampage and I bought another 11 companies. I bought 11 companies in total. So I had 12, including the one that I had started. We went from about 1.5 million of revenue to 13.5 million revenue. We went from 30 staff to 135 staff. We went from not being able to find 2.5 grand to having a payroll of 250 grand a month in 18 months. So there was just so many things going on there. But I still believed I was the person that could run these businesses better than anybody else. And so at that point, I was still heavily immersed in the day-to-day operations of all of those companies spread across 13 different businesses. I got fat, I got unhealthy, I got drunk every weekend. I was not in a good place. I often used to joke the only thing worse than having one shit business is having 12 shit businesses. The whole experience was that, well, my paradigm that I lived in was that I was essential to the functioning of these businesses. And what was funny was I decided to take 3 days off. And it was a kind of digital detox, but back when all that meant was turning off your old Nokia phone. Yeah. There wasn't too much other
no more snake.
No more snake. But so I turned off my my phone and went away for 3 days. And when I came back, I was going through my emails, and there was an email from the Friday that basically said, we need 40 grand by 4 p.m. to make the payroll. If we don't do it, all the staff are going to leave. If all the staff leave, then we lose the contract that we have with this big customer, and everything's completely fucked. And then on the Saturday, there was a message saying, don't worry about it, we sorted it. And I just thought to myself, do you know what? If I hadn't had my little holiday, my 3 days off, I would have jumped on that. I would run around, I would have robbed Peter, maybe not paid Paul, dragged some money from here, dragged some money from there, solved the problem, felt really chuffed that I'd solved this problem because I'm a problem solver, gone to the pub, got arse-faced drunk and celebrated this problem that I'd solved, and then, carried on with my life. Whereas I'd achieved exactly the same outcome by doing nothing. And it was a really good sort of check and balance that actually I'm not as important as I think I am. And at that point, I literally took a massive step back from those businesses, empowered all of the management in those companies. And I remember saying to a friend at the time, I would rather one of these companies goes bust than I have to turn up. So if the problem is that bad that they fail, fuck it, let them fail. Because the time that I can get back, I can go buy more businesses. I can go and fill those holes. I can solve the problems of those companies strategically. I can do a joint venture that will double them. I can do a merger that will improve their value. And so that was my kind of epiphany for becoming a shareholder instead of an operator, moving from, business owner from business runner. And I think that's a really important transition. And it's one that most entrepreneurs never make. I speak to entrepreneurs and they've been running a business for 40 years, but they haven't evolved in that 40 years. It's 1 year, 40 times over. It's not 40 years of growth and development and improvement. It's fucking Groundhog Day.
Yeah, because they think they're so pivotal to the business.
Exactly. If I leave it, it'll fall apart.
They're the brainchild. It's their thing. It's really interesting because it reminds me of that story of Richard Branson, where when he was looking at Virgin, I think he wanted to retrofit some of his planes with TVs in the back of the chairs, and it was going to cost 10 million. And so he went to the bank and said, can I have 10 million to invest into my current fleet of planes? And they said, absolutely not. We can't give you 10 million. You can't afford this. So when he was thinking about how to get around the problem, he decided to go to the bank and ask them for something like 10 billion to just buy all new planes, which they gave him. And it's just the same way of thinking that you've just touched on there, where it's just thinking so differently on your pursuit of whatever it is. And there's two things there that I think are really interesting, what you said. One is that you had that realization that you could do the deals in 97 when someone asked you and you said, actually, no, I'll buy the businesses. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And the second part is that it comes down to teams, and businesses are just collections of people.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested in, when you had that realization that you could go and do more deals, at what point did you realize this is a team sport? And if I can empower these people, these businesses become better and I'm less important?
Yeah, so the first one is getting out of the way of your own ego, because your own ego will convince you that you're the only person that can do this and that you're the best at doing this and that everybody else is just going to do a half-assed version of it. The other thing is the business you start is actually very hard to step away from. The business you buy, you can choose how much you engage with the operations of that business. And so the next epiphany I had was actually selling one of my companies. And when I sold the company, I had the epiphany that you don't make money running businesses, you make money when you sell them. It was creating that capital event. And the amazing thing is that when you sell a business and you get that chunk of capital, you can deploy that capital into passive investments, and you can generally make more cash investing the money than you could take out of that business while you were running it. Because even if you have a company that's making 200, 300, 400 grand a year of profit, the amount of cash you can actually take out of that business might only be 10, 20, 30% of that profit, and you can sell it for maybe 3 or 4 times the profit it makes. And so it's very easy to invest that and generate a very similar level of income without having any staff, any customers, any of the shit, any of the risk, because small businesses are volatile assets. If they lose a couple of customers or they lose a couple of staff, the whole fucking thing changes. Now, the reason people don't sell their business is because they think next year is going to be their best year ever. They're only right 1% of the time. And so 99 times they're wrong, 1 time they're right. And so if next year really is going to be your best year ever, that's a great storytelling again. That's a great story to tell the person who's going to buy your business. The right time to sell a business is now. Nobody wants to buy a business when it's in decline. If it really is going to be the best year next year, put an earn out into the deal so that you take your money now, and if it does hit it out the park next year, you get paid next year too. Why not? That again is an asymmetric bet. It's a bet you can't lose. If the business rages, then you get upside. If it doesn't, you don't lose anything. You've already got the amount that you've sold it for today. And when I sold my first business, I thought I was selling it for money, which was part of the part of the equation. But the thing I also got was all my time back, because this is the business I've been running for 10 years. I've been embedded in it. Even though I tried to step back from management and employed a CEO and everything, there's these nitty little questions that keep coming up all the time. And all these, I used to say that all the CEOs of my companies dealt with the shittiest problems in their business, and the ones that they couldn't solve came to me. So I had a diet of pure shit every day, which was the shittiest of shit problems that nobody else could solve. And so basically I sold all of those businesses. Some of them I sold back to management and staff. Some of them I sold to third parties. A couple of them I closed down actually in 2009. And I basically just cleared my deck completely and decided I would just focus on buying and selling companies. And the new ones that I bought, I wouldn't get as involved in the management as I had in the ones that I'd done in the past. So it was kind of a clean slate. And that was the best thing. Now, the companies that I own, I reckon if I turn up, they might know me. They've certainly never met me. I've never been to their offices. So that makes life much, much easier.
And it's interesting to hear you talk about buying and selling businesses as a less risky thing to do than to start a business. Because people just go, well, I can start a business. After a while, it becomes more stable and I'm in control of it. I've got a friend who sold his business last year for tens of millions after having a 15-minute conversation with Gary Vee. And he was talking about, shall I grow this revenue up and up and up, or shall I sell it? And Gary Vee said the opposite of what you would have thought he would say. He said, sell it.
Yeah.
Because the best time to sell is today. If you can get the price, depends what they're gonna pay you. It's the best time is today.
Yeah. Never underestimate the power of a capital event. I think people transpose.
I just want to briefly interrupt this podcast so I can talk to you about Nutrition Kitchen, who have kindly sponsored this episode. As entrepreneurs who are looking to stay as healthy as possible, fueling ourselves with high quality food without breaking the bank or wasting time can be tough day to day. Nutrition Kitchen solves that issue by delivering incredible meals to your door, tailored to your diet, whether you're trying to lose weight, build muscle, or maintain balance. They change their menus all the time so you can choose from a variety of dishes and leave the monotony of meal prepping behind. Now, back to our guest.
Those kind of traditional work and retirement models into entrepreneurship, and they go, I'm going to build this thing until I'm old, and then I'm going to sell it and go and do everything I ever wanted, which is the whole kind of, I'm going to work until I'm almost dead, and then I'm going to travel the world and see everything. And it's a fucking stupid idea, but it's ingrained in our psyche, because we've heard stories of people that, sold for 100 million or whatever. Selling for 2 million now, or even $1 million now, would absolutely transform your life. You would end up with a 6-figure passive income, and a completely clean slate to go and attack things. The two things entrepreneurs never have is time and money. So once you've done your first exit, you now have time and money. You're now in the top 0.1% of entrepreneurs because you're the one with the time and you're the one with the money. Again, you need to be careful what you do with that money. The fool and their money are easily parted. But if you invest the money and then go and buy businesses without using the money, then that's the way that you can really transform things.
And that's why people in the Harbour Club are doing so well, right? But apart from the Harbour Club, the other thing I want to talk about is when you buy and sell businesses, or in my eyes, if you're looking at buying a group or creating a group, just something that we're interested in, we're currently doing, what sort of strikes really or resonates really highly with me is that when you start to build a group, you don't need loads of sales teams, you don't need loads of marketing teams, you don't need loads of HR. You can just put it into one thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of deduplication that you can do. So, we describe the merger as the 2 + 2 = 6 effect because, you could have two companies doing 100 grand of profit each, but how they get there is very different. And also there's a lot of duplication between them. The one warning I would give you on that is, again, a bit like that I'm really important, therefore you have to do what I say approach. The same thing happens with mergers. So what I used to do, or what I did when I started, which is the kind of conventional wisdom, is you look at the two companies, you draft up a spreadsheet and go, right, this person's going, that person's going, we're going to merge these, we're going to put them in this office, we're going to do all this stuff. When you then go and execute that, it's 18 months of pain, strife, arguments, shit, all that sort of stuff. What I've learned, the biggest lesson that I learned is get them to do the work. So sit them both in a room and go, right, everything you do is duplicated. Everything you do is a fucking waste. I will incentivize you to make extra dollars or save extra dollars. Every dollar you save or every dollar you make, you're going to get this bonus. It could be an equity bonus, could be a cash bonus, but incentivize them to find the solutions and then brainstorm how they're going to do it. And then their ideas, they go and implement. Because basically, if it's your idea, it's shit and they'll sabotage it. If it's their idea, they'll even subsidize it them fucking selves to make it work, to prove to you it was the right way to do things. things. So make it their idea. Decentralize the centralization. So decentralize the decision making to get them to collaborate to solve these problems, because you then get rid of all the unintended consequences that sometimes come from the top down driven. Plus, it removes all the indigestion from doing a deal. Yeah. If you're not careful, you buy a company and you spend the next 18 months integrating it and you're not buying more companies. The best value you could bring to the table is buying more companies, not fucking around with the ones that you've already got. So
that's really interesting. And so if you were looking to buy companies, are you industry agnostic, or do you want them all into one thing, or how do you think about it?
I'm industry agnostic. We buy things in all different sectors. I normally advise people when they first start to operate in a sector they understand, because 90% of doing a deal is the rapport and empathy that you create with the vendor. This is not corporate finance. This is owner managed businesses. It's a very different animal to what you learn about on an MBA course, for example. So it's important that you can build that rapport and empathy. Easier to build that rapport and empathy if you come across as knowing what the fuck you're talking about. So if it's an industry you understand, that will help you enormously. But you can then, once you've done deals, you've then got experience of doing deals, and it's much easier then to go into other industries or other sectors without looking stupid.
And one of the things that I really like that, because one of the things I've heard you say a lot of times is just go and do your full one. And again, fall flat in your face, like just do your first one and understand, just even if it doesn't go through, just understand the mechanics of what they're going to want, what you're going to want, how it actually looks.
Yeah, it will make, again, 90% of it is this rapport and empathy. And a big part of that rapport comes from confidence. If you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And they can smell that across the other side of the table. So they will smell your fear, your anxiety, if you have doubts in yourself, you won't get the deal closed, because they will sense it. But if you know what you're doing, or you at least you have the bravado that you know what you're doing, then you'll probably get the deal done.
So you almost need that with or without you energy. Like you're going to go and do it, and if they don't want to come, that's fine. There's other businesses you can buy.
Exactly.
Okay. So if someone's thinking about an organic acquisition plan, there's the first time they've heard of it, but they're like, okay, now I think I have some means about me where I can go and buy a business. What should they be looking for?
So the first thing is you don't need the means about you. If you have a company already, then obviously the first thing is target identification. So you need to think about horizontal acquisitions, which are basically businesses that look like yours. So if you're a letting agent, it would be other letting agents. And then you look at vertical acquisitions. Now, normally, if you look at your purchase ledger and your sales ledger, that will give you some ideas for vertical acquisitions, the type of companies that exist in there. But for example, with that letting agent, it might be picking up property management companies, painters and decorators, those kind of things that would be suppliers or customers to the letting agent. So draw up that big list, then decide on your geography, where you want to expand. Are you looking for just, to focus on your own area? Are you looking to create a nationwide coverage? Are you looking to go global with your acquisition strategy? And then start to shortlist the companies that would fit a profile. And typically, it depends where you are, but typically sub 5 million in revenue or sub 10 million in revenue in the US, those businesses don't have a lot of choices in terms of who they can sell to. So they're often easier targets. You can target bigger businesses, but they're the kind of lowest hanging fruit in terms of not having many other options open to them. So start shortlisting them. Tools like LinkedIn, and there's loads of different credit checking software and business search software that you can use to kind of identify who all the targets are. And then just go, don't get hung up about getting a deal done. Go and have conversations with people who own businesses that you wouldn't mind owning. So just go and meet those entrepreneurs and talk to them and explain what you're trying to do. We're looking at putting a roll-up together in the digital marketing space, and we just thought we'd have a chat with you about what the challenges are, what the opportunities are, where you see the industry going, what your thoughts are, and just treat it as a fact-finding mission. And what you'll find is that when you have a dozen or so of those conversations, you'll start to see stars lining up where, that one would fit with that one, and this one has this problem, and that one has the solution to it, and you'll start to see how things could potentially fit together. And then obviously, once you have that little group that you're in communication with, you can then look at deal structures that you could potentially propose to them that might solve some of their problems and get you what you want.
I wonder if when people hear this kind of stuff, if they lean into it and go, this sounds brilliant, and as soon as they start planning out, they start to lean away because it starts to become worrying, and I wonder if there's a feeling of overexposure when you talk about this kind of thing.
I think overwhelm is probably the feeling.
Sure.
Yeah, I think when you started a business, you thought it was fucking easy because everybody does. That's why you start it. Once you've started it, you realize how fucking hard it is, and what a vast topic it is, and how every day is a school day, and every day you're bumping your head and figuring out things. And then you hear about buying companies and you go, oh, that sounds easy, I could do that. And then you start to look into it, you peel back the curtain and you go, fucking hell, this is huge. And then you remember all the shit you went through learning about startups and go, oh, am I really ready for that? And the only thing I would say to people is, yes, it is a vast topic. I always joke that I know 10% about M&A, which is 9% more than everybody else. So every day is a school day for me too. I still make loads of mistakes, but the juice is worth the squeeze. When you do a deal, it's a 6-figure, 7-figure, or even 8-figure outcome, which is literally transformational to your life. It's also feast or famine in terms of working. So you have tons of free time. You can travel a lot. You can spend time with your family. I've got a young family. I've seen them grow up. I've spent every day with my kids, which if I was still in that entrepreneur phase in my 20s, not a fucking chance. So I'm really grateful that I decided to pursue and understand this space, even though it is a vast topic. Now we kind of have ways of doing deals that are a bit more low resistance and easier to do and easier to adapt to. So you don't have to go and do big complicated transactions. You can do something small and simple to kind of get you started, and that's a great way to then learn the basic mechanics, like how do I transfer the shares into my name, how do I deal with director appointments, how do, all those little things that the big picture is relatively easy to grasp, but the devil is in the detail.
Which is really interesting. And again, before we started talking, I was touching on when I used to work for the last corporate I worked for, we had a quite an aggressive merger and acquisition plan. But I was working on the product and e-com side. So whilst we would buy a company for $500 million, $1 billion, and you're like, oh, well, I have M&A experience. Yes, you can bring teams in, you can plug tech stacks in, you can white label software, and you can grow software as they come together. I think when you bring it back down to a level where you're going to do it with your team, I'm talking about myself as maybe a small business owner, then you're like, oh, I don't actually know the detail, because there was a law team, there was an accountancy team.
Yeah, this is funny. I often read, these kind of gurus who are selling courses saying, I've done 6 billion of deals. Exactly. And you find out, they were kind of in the room when 6 billion of deals happened, which is not the same. I think it is really important. And also just this, every book that's written, every, all the MBA courses, all of that stuff, it's kind of like how the biggest brewer in the world bought the second largest brewer in the world. You learn fuck all from that case study. And ultimately deals come down to two people. There's the owner of the other business and there's you, and you have to figure out how you're going to structure this between the two of you so that it works for everybody. That type of deal is completely different to everything else that's out there, and yet it's the majority of the market. It's half the economy. It's nearly all businesses are small. I think it's important to understand the nuances and differences, and get on with it.
And it's actually a really common structure as well. Like if you look at the biggest businesses in the world, they own almost all the other businesses. Isn't it right? There's something like 10 or 15 businesses that basically own all the major brands. If you think about fashion,
certainly if you look at like FMCG stuff, like P&G and Unilever, probably control most of the shit you put in your bathroom or kitchen.
Exactly, one sort of niche. So I'm interested, if say someone's listening to this and they're doing £400,000 or £500,000 a year revenue, $250,000 profit.
Yeah.
At what point is that too small to be thinking about an organic acquisition plan?
It's small. It's a small business in terms of being acquired. So basically, if you look at the universe of companies, it's like a pyramid. You've got the Apple at the top, or whoever it is at the moment, or Amco or Nvidia or someone. So you've got the really big companies at the top, and you've got millions of small ones at the bottom. And if you then look at the universe of buyers or the universe of capital that's out there, it's the opposite. There's no one at the bottom and there's everybody at the top. So everybody can buy Nvidia. No one can buy Jeff's Plumbers. So what you want to do is move up the pyramid. And there's a couple of things that happen when you move up the pyramid. One is your business becomes more sellable. Bigger is better. But the other thing is the price expansion, because you end up with a greater demand than there is supply. At the bottom, there's oversupply and no demand. At the top, there's over demand and no supply. And so consequently, the capital flows towards the top. So the growth in value is exponential. So we'll use that plumber's example. Jeff Plumbers might be 1 times earnings or 1.2 times earnings when he comes to sell. But if he was a 20 million plumbing and heating business, he might get 6 or 7 times earnings. And if he was $100 million plumbing and heating business listed on the stock market, he might get 20 times earnings. And so there's a massive compression of value when you move up that food chain. So as the $500,000 entrepreneur doing $250,000 of profit, which is quite a high margin, my strategy would be to go and buy other businesses, and particularly at that point, probably horizontal acquisitions. So the simplest way would be to create an SPV, a special purpose vehicle. It's a new limited company, effectively, and that new limited company goes and buys a lookalike business that would sit alongside you. And if you want, you can put the shares in your company into that SPV later as well, so that you create a group with 2 companies in it. There's no urgency to do that. You move up tax bands because $250,000 is right below the threshold for corporation tax, so you might want to keep them separate while you're doing you can integrate companies that are separate. There's no harm in sharing resources across separate companies. But yeah, you might put the group together later when it's coming closer to sort of exit time. You might build them as silos initially to maximize kind of tax efficiency.
But you could still sell a group, even though they're not in the same industry. Or are we talking...
Yeah, so the other thing, we teach a lot of this on the Harbour Club, is how to structure shareholder agreements so that you can sell a group even when you're not the major shareholder in the businesses, which is really important, because I see this so often, which is people start a company and they go, I'll give 10% to my ops director, I'll give 20% to this guy, I've got this investor with 10%. And then when it comes to selling, everybody has a different idea. Oh, I think we can get more. Oh, yeah, I want to sell. And you have things like preemption rights, which are normally automatically in the memorandum and articles of association, but they don't give you any... preemption is just the right for the other shareholders to buy you on the same commercial terms, but it doesn't say what if they don't. So you need to have the what if they don't clause, which is how can we always guarantee that we can sell 100% of this company, even though we have a diverse shareholder base. And so things like that are really important because, I've learned them all the hard way, basically. So over my decades of doing deals, I've been a passenger in quite a few companies where I couldn't get out and couldn't do anything, didn't have any power. And so I now mitigate that with the agreement that I get them to sign. And weirdly, the shareholders agreement that your lawyer will draft often doesn't cover off these issues. It will be hundreds of pages long, but it's hundreds of pages of shit that are meaningless when it comes to actually getting something done.
So this is the really interesting part, because there's so many elements that you need to learn. Like once you've decided this is something you need to do, there is so much value in a mentor. Everyone knows that if you're in business after a while, mentors are invaluable. Yeah. So I'm interested in just the top level at this element right here, which is when you're looking at buying a business, what are you looking for? Are you looking for something that's really struggling or doing really well? Or
so again, different strategies, horses for courses. We have 15 different strategies on the Harbour Club. Some of them are aimed at distressed deals. Some of them, like real basket case kind of things. Some of them are aimed at well-established, profitable companies. So I haven't done a distressed deal since 2012. I'm just advising on one at the moment, but I haven't done a deal for myself since 2012. But we've taken over 100 companies public since then. And so we focus on well-established, profitable, well-run businesses. In fact, of the last 50 companies that we bought, the average age is about 20 years. They're profitable, well-run, grown-up businesses, basically.
So you're almost looking for the boring business, the one that's just churning.
Ones that make money. Weird, huh?
Oh, that's so odd. Yeah. Sales and money. Gosh, what is business?
Very, very old-fashioned.
Yeah.
Very, very Gen X.
So that's really cool. So when we're talking about getting the business, if you were going to take a business on any one of those strategies, what would you then do as the sort of first port of call to help it grow? Obviously, there's loads of financial things you can do in the background. But
actually, that's mainly it. What we tend to do is the hands-off stuff rather than the hands-on stuff. So we like to empower the management to make their own improvements, and we give them some frameworks that they can use to help them do that stuff internally. So improving cross-selling, improving those kind of bits. But most of what we do is actually financial engineering, and financial engineering, the way I describe it, is more playing around with the balance sheet and the P&L and the accounting treatments that the company uses. Nearly every company is run from a tax efficient basis, not a profit declaring basis. And so quite often just by adjusting the way that you present yourself, you can have a massive uplift in the performance and the view of that business. So most of what we do is tinkering with the numbers rather than the people and the operations and the things that go on in the business. And again, bitter experience.
Yeah, which is why it's interesting. Why it's important to buy that business that's already doing well, right?
Yeah. So look, I mean, a startup's horrible. Startup's super painful. There's no way you can do it no money down. You always need cash. You always need something. When you buy a business, even if it's only a couple of years old, it will have a website. It will have customers. It will have a phone that rings and people buy stuff. That is a hard slog to get to. There's a high barrier to entry, not just in terms of cash, but your time. If a startup takes 3 years to get to some level of maturity where it's functional, how many 3-year goes have you got in your life? So you can't keep doing that. You have to find some way of getting rid of that 3 years at some point.
And that's a really, really cool point. And I've heard you say that before, because the 3-year cycles, there's only a limited amount, right? So it's almost like the way that you look at it, which is so different.
It's like you get 10 goes.
Yeah, exactly. But you're compounding those goes.
Yeah.
Almost like the way you said.
Yeah, we're doing it. So since 2016, we've averaged a deal a month.
A deal a month. Yeah. Wow. Okay, so if I flip that on its head and go, I want to sell the business. What can you do to make your business worth more as part of a sale?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing is that financial engineering stuff. Like I say, lots of people, things like how you recognize revenue, how you recognize costs. I mean, this was like a crazy epiphany for me when I was about 19 years old, and I had my telecoms company, and my finance director at the time, like glorified bookkeeper, but he was a fully qualified accountant. He said to me, okay, we finished the year. Do you want to show 200 grand loss, break even, or 200 grand profit? And I was like, hang on a second, it's fucking maths, isn't it? We had our sales, we had our costs, there's a number at the bottom. And then he taught me about accrual accounting, capitalization, income recognition, cost recognition. And my mind just went, what the fuck is this? And then I started thinking, well, I can see how Enron happened. They taught a fucking entrepreneur accounting. And basically, I was just mind blown that it wasn't maths. It wasn't as straightforward. And now what we can do is effectively, when we buy a business, we can then retrofit or retro engineer the accounts to show a completely different picture. And like I say, the accountant doesn't normally ask the entrepreneur how they would like it presented. They just automatically adopt the most tax efficient model. And the most tax efficient model is normally the lose 200 grand option out of those 3. So we literally just flip it from the lose 200 to the make 200 grand option, and that massively improves the profit. There's a few little tricks we have with cash flow as well that we can play around with, because we move the business to a cash footing, so it operates on a cash. In business, everything measured improves. The thing you focus on tends to get better. So we focus on cash. So we drive all of the focus in the business to cash, because ultimately businesses don't go bust from a lack of profit, they go bust from a lack of cash. And good cash flowing businesses are more appealing for buyers. And then the next thing is you need to put it into the top 1% of businesses that are for sale. And that's normally done through creating a really good data room that people can access and find out more about the business. And that has a little bit of the how you do anything is how you do everything aspect to it, because if people see that data room is professional and well organized, they'll assume the whole business is professional and well organized. So it's kind of like the shop window for the business. So having that is really important. Having a really good information memorandum, how everything is set up. Getting some pre-approved finance on the company, so a way that people could leverage the business to borrow money to give to you to buy it. If you can get that set up, then you're in the top 1% of the businesses that are out there being advertised for sale. And bear in mind, only about 8% of the businesses put up for sale actually sell in the small business arena. So you need to be in that 1% or you're never selling. And then obviously the other things that you can do to massively drive value are joint ventures, mergers, acquisitions, exits, because all of those will have that order of magnitude impact on the size. And as you move up the size pyramid, the opportunity, the audience for potential buyers grows with you.
So again, it's almost like a misconception that you would need to look at the marketing and the team. You're looking at a higher level and going, no, let's impact the entire business ahead of sales.
Yeah, and look, there's always. I mean, I remember when I bought a company with a small group of Harbour clubbers back in probably about 2009, I think it was, and they were all very experienced entrepreneurs. One of them had a marketing agency that had exited successfully. One of them had just won an award for being the best in his industry that year. So these were all really good business operators, and So they went into this business and they drew up their 30-point plan of things that they would like to do to improve the business. And then just as a thought exercise, I invited the CEO of the world's largest business broker to come and sit with them, gave him the list of 30 things and said, which of these things would improve the value of the business or accelerate the sale? And he looked at it for about an hour or about 40 minutes and then came back and said, none of them. Nothing on that list would actually increase the value or accelerate the sale. They're all lovely things, and that list would be a great thing to show a potential buyer that you've thought about all of these things, and to say to them, hey, imagine what this business could do if you did all of these things. But to actually do them, you'd probably end up spending money, and if you spent money, you'd reduce profit, and if you reduce profit, you reduce the value, and you'd also take time to implement, and that's time that you're not selling the business. And so, a lot of the things that are intuitive to get involved in don't actually add value or accelerate the sale.
Which is really interesting, because it's almost the same with, if you're going to simplify it into like buying and selling properties, like you want to get the planning permission and you want to show the renders and tell the story of how your family can grow up in this house.
Yeah.
You don't want to spend the money always.
Sell the dream, not the actuality.
Tell the story, right?
Yeah.
Every time.
Yeah.
So finally, why should we all have that organic acquisition plan as part of our future proofing or future planning for our businesses?
Well, like I say, I think there's a point as a startup entrepreneur, there's a point you can get your business to, and then it plateaus. And I'm sure many of your listeners will be plateaued right now because it's the most common state of entrepreneurship past failure. So you've either fucked it up or you've plateaued, basically. And this is the way that you can get that order of magnitude growth. The only way I know that you could double your business in terms of revenue in the next week is to go and do a deal. I don't think there's a marketing thing that you could do or a sales campaign that you could do that would double your business. There might be, but it's very, very unlikely, and it would certainly require some investment. Whereas a deal could literally double the size of your business, and that could be a joint venture deal, that could be a merger, or it could be an acquisition. The other thing is just, I think this is a really important skill set, and it's like a muscle that you have to work. There's a lexicon, a language that you need to get used to. It's a really great way of starting to understand accounts a little better. I think too many entrepreneurs just switch off and say, no, that's not for me, I don't want to understand it. It's actually very fucking simple. You just need to learn it. And this immerses you into an environment where you have to learn it. It's a bit like, going to live in rural France for a year, you're going to come back speaking French. So immerse yourself in this stuff, and you'll understand all this kind of accounting stuff, which is hugely valuable in everything you do in entrepreneurship going forwards. And the big one is wealth. I don't think you can really create wealth running a business. There are examples, but that's kind of like saying there are examples of people that won the lottery. Yeah. So you need to take a company public. You need to have an exit. In fact, if you look at all the people you know as being wealthy entrepreneurs, I bet you there's a deal in the story. So Tesla sold, Elon Musk sold PayPal. He bought Tesla, actually. That was an acquisition. Yeah. So, every one of the Dragon's Den, there's nearly always an exit story. You don't have to dig very deep. Richard Branson, you've mentioned already, he in his book, he says he was basically bankrupt for nearly his entire business career until he sold Virgin Music to EMI, and that recapitalized everything. And that was the tipping point where he went from brink of bankruptcy to actually having money. So there's always a deal in there somewhere. The story is always entrepreneurial, but the reality is there was a deal.
Yeah. Jeremy, that was so interesting. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you for coming on.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
If you like these episodes, feel free to subscribe to our Healthy Hustle newsletter below, where you'll get behind the scenes information from our guests, as well as from the studio operator who helps us create these cinematic episodes. It's also full of business advice and tips, and it will help you join the community of healthy entrepreneurs.